I was going to introduce me. I'm José. I'm coming all the way from Alicante. I work at Zunzuit, who is a voice IP operator. My presentation here is about voice IP. Let us have an introduction as a summary, and then we will get into telephone fraud questions. Who's familiar with VoIP? Raise your hand. Only a few people. Well, usually at conferences, when there is a discussion on malware reversing Android, they all know what it is. And yet, when there is a presentation on voice IP, people know what it is, rings a bell, or have no clue. And often I'm talking and I picture people looking like this. So here you have a short intro to explain what it is. Voice IP, it's a telephony on the internet or through the internet. We are used to traditional telephony where our conversation travels through a physical wire, but with voice IP we code it and send it through the data network. We are often, those of you who have not raised your hand, you've probably used voice IP. How many of you have used Google Voice or phone or WhatsApp or Skype or Line? Probably more than one in the room. That's voice IP. Also at home, if you have a router that it's fiber optic, by Movistar or Orange, you're using voice IP without knowing. So our phones are analogic, but yet they are connected to the router, and so it transfers the signal into voice IP for its communication. If you're working at an office and have a phone looking like this, you're also using voice IP. This is not the best example of a connection, since there you need to have the data network independent from the voice net because of security reasons, but that would be a question for another topic discussion entirely. And probably you've all used these tools that are also voice IP enabled. Do you know what a click to call is? Don't? Have you ever gone to a website for real estate or sales of products? Enter your phone number and we will give you a call back to report to you. You're familiar, right? So that's voice IP. So we type our phone number, click call, and you're calling a salesperson who sends or forwards the call to us. And then what about callback gateways and gateways and callback services? Anyone from abroad in the room? Well, probably you know there are many phone numbers that you can call. Those are local numbers through which you can have an international call, which is at a national cost. That's a gateway. How does it work? Well, yes, and also in Spain numbers that start with a 900. That's the prefix here. Well, those are retributed or paid services, so whoever gets the call gets money for that. If I charge 50 cents per minute whenever I get a call, anyone calling abroad costing me below that, that's money I get. So these are all voice IP enabled services. Callback services are the following. You place a call, then you get hung up and the system calls both you and the other person. What about CRMs? CRMs are commercial apps that are used for the management of potential customers or prospects, and there they give us an option to place a call through the system. You push a button, it calls, the customer memorizes time of call, whether it was taken or not. And with voice IP we have so many advantages. First, there are many things we can do that cannot be done with standard telephony, as we've just seen. Then geographic mobility. So, not anymore, but in the past we used to move just 2 blocks back and we had to change the telephone number because it was a different node connection. With voice IP, we can get our call wherever we are. Actually, I go on holidays and still get the phone calls on my phone. Just by having an internet connection is enough. I tap in and it is. And usually cost saving, especially international calls, are cheaper. As part of a conventional system such as at home or an office, we will have a voice network where we have it connected to the output at home, or we have a traditional call center, and then we have the data network where we plug into the internet, and then we have mixed systems. What we've seen before, a light box or routers or even call centers at a company that are analogic, and then internally they are connected to voice IP. And then we also have full voice IP solutions where even devices themselves have an IP address and are connected to the network just as any other device, and the whole network works on the internet. As for the structure we might come across when working with a voice IP system, we might have just a call center at an office. We have resellers, they resell traffic or flow. They can have IP operators connecting call centers, telephones, resellers, other operators as well. And finally, we have carriers, the ones giving us access to the traditional network. Anything below that goes through the internet. And yet we need to be able to communicate with non-voice IP devices. It wouldn't make sense to talk to people just who are on voice IP. And that's why we've got carriers. When we are getting a call, it's unrouted through the operator all the way to our call center, and the other way around, just the same. Place a call provider and placed outside. How does the voice IP system works? Contrary to a standard telephone where everything works analogically or digitally through a wire, here the signal is codified and we use data packets. For voice IP we have two stages: signaling, where we can have communication amongst devices and servers, an intermediate session or media session, that it's the audio transmission, sound transmission. Signaling, we've got so many protocols. The most widespread is the SIP, which has a pretty similar syntax as HTTP. Probably you are familiar with all that and post and everything. Here we have a series of messages: register, invite, options, update, etc. And through those messages we will start communication and have it between among servers and devices. Often we will need authentication. When we need authentication, will be a digest register. We register a device, a terminal, and first we need to authenticate. It will send us a challenge, and then we will set another registered message authenticating ourselves, and if it's okay, we'll be registered. Authentication with register is mandatory, but with other messages such as invite, it's optional. This is one of the main security fails that we can find, or troubles we can find, because people tend to mix it up. Since it's a register, it seems it's a website. What about we have a control panel at a website? Username, password, validated, and we don't need to validate for each page. We have a token and we can go through the whole site and panel. With a register packet, we can only get phone calls, which means that we are telling the system we are located at this port, IP address, and if there is a call to us, they know how to deliver it. It's just for receiving purposes. But when invite is in place, it's placing a call, it's sending a call. It would be similar to an email system. You know how it works, right? SMTP. We set up an email server, and what if we do not request an authentication? A few minutes back, we are in all spam lists because there are many spammers trying to find servers allowing them to send. So either we request username and password for email sending, or make sure that the user has had access to IPOP or IMAP inbox and validated it. Well, just the same here. Whether we have to have an authentication or make sure that they have registered using their device. We will see that later on because it's a hot topic. And we have also the SDP protocol associated to SIP. Those are all communications where there is a dialogue. It gives us information about the IP address, the port, and codes to be used for the media transmission. As for the sound transmission itself, we will be using RTP protocol in any variant, ciphered and non-ciphered, and a series of codecs. As you said, you speak over the phone, on the phone, it gets the communication, and it uses a codec in order to be able to send the packet through the data network. Differences between codecs is compression and quality and everything else. It It's all dependent on our system. If we compress a codec way too much, we will need lots of CPU to decompress it, but just only limited bandwidth, and the other way around, maybe not much CPU, but larger bandwidth for its transmission if it has a different size. Well, this was theory, a bit boring, but it's important for you to understand how a voice IP system works. And about telephone fraud. As part of these systems, we find so many types of fraud. Scams and tapping and spam and phishing, which is telephone phishing. So we can pool potential attackers targets into 4 groups. We can have people who are snooping, curious, who want to know what our system is like and maybe place a call as a trophy. Those who have fraud intention, those are criminals trying to make profit through phishing or using glitches. And we also have DOS attacks that can be distributed DOS that might lead to a quality of loss in quality service or ruin the service. And we have TDOS attacks that are targeted to a given phone number, a given device. And then we have illegal tapping, where the idea is to tap into our conversations real time, or have also traffic captures to listen to our conversations later on. Some cases I came across media or blogs that I found interesting are the following. Here, this is a company, according to what they say, within a day they've lost 15,000 euros because of the setup in the call center, because they've sent invite messages unintentionally. If you do not force a register with an invite message and you have a public call center on the internet, this may happen to you. It seems this company had a misconfigured call center who a Malaysian operator decided to send all calls to Cuba through that call center. So 15,000 euros one day. This is on Insiba's website. This is from last year. Another company who similarly warns, they got an invoice that was a bit steep, and it seems there was a problem in how they've set up their call center, and someone used this to call premium numbers. Those are special price. In Spain are 806. That's a prefix. And when they got the invoice, the bill, well, it could have been even worse, and yet they were lucky, and only 5,000 euros, you see. This case here was quite well known back to 2010. Yes, 2010 it was. And this is a Romanian organized crime band or gang that was calling premium numbers through stolen accounts, but on top of that decided to go all big about it, and they were with a platform sending third-party calls, and they were making profit because you don't need to pay the carrier because it's stolen account, so bigger profit. And this was the website, Zado Communications website. It has been closed now. Supposedly they started late 2009 for personal calls. 23,500 calls, personal calls, a bit too much, as I said, but they come to realize that they could make a lot of profit and decided to have the shuttered communications on. Within a year, they had embezzled over 1 million euros, so they are in prison now. This is from 2006, first sentence because of a telephone fraud with voice IP calls. And this person here had 2 companies where he was offering voice IP services, but same as before, decided it was more profitable to use stolen accounts, not private accounts, but voice IP operators who had found security glitches and had created shell accounts to place the calls. And technically, he resorted to this other person who was tracking operators and tracking sham shell accounts. They were caught in June 2006, and they had hacked over 15 companies, and the profit was around $1 million. Why would a company decide to switch to voice IP? Well, first off, as I said before, because that way they can have it embedded with other systems, do things that are not possible with standard telephony, geographical mobility, low costs when calling, and often companies change out of a need. So picture a company that is growing, has an analogic call center that cost them a ton back in the day, and we want to plug in a few more devices. Each phone needs to be physically connected through a wire to this call center. And there's a time where no more connections are possible, so you need to get an estimate, change the call center, and it seems that's the phase of the boss when he gets the estimate, so it goes for something a bit more cost effective. And what's cheaper than voice IP? That's open source software, just a service is needed, just a device. Even if it's not a large company, even a Raspberry Pi will do the trick. And who needs to set it up? Who do you think is the one in charge of setting it up? Usually a specialized supplier, but most of the time companies have IT technicians in-house, or providers that are the ones with Office, or the ones that hang up a picture. And this is his face when he's told that he has to set it up. That's when problems start. We need to set up a system where we have a voice IP call center that has to be connected to an operator. What ports should I open? Well, 5060 VDP, that's the one I use so that the operator can get connected. First mistake. We don't have to open a port. The operator will give us username and password and we will be connected to the operator. What if we open the firewall and we direct it all to the call center that anyone could manage and plug in? What about phone in policies? What are the working hours? Regularly, not working at night or during the weekend. Why would we allow calls at those times? And if we only have Spanish destinations, why would we allow Palestine or China or whatever? And then concurrent channels. Actually, with a standard telephone, we speak on the phone and there is a beep if the line is occupied. But on voice IP, we can configure as many simultaneous channels as we want, which means 10 simultaneous channels, 10 people will be speaking at the same time. It doesn't make much sense, since usually you set it up with two channels, one for a conversation, another one to switch or take a second call at a given time. But it makes no sense to have 20 or 30 channels at a time. And when you see that things don't work, you start trying it all out, and sometimes you change this value. This is another example from a forum where someone's complaining that I think my call center's been hacked. Over the weekends, no one's in the office and the traffic is higher than. Yes, your call center is being hacked and your bill will be off the roof. And what about calls to cell phones in Senegal? Cost is 50 cents a minute. It seems there's this account that's been stolen by someone and they keep calling. And that account is set up, misconfigured, and we have 10 simultaneous calls. So 10 simultaneous calls can be placed. The attacker uses Sunday and Saturday when no one is there, so totaling 2,880 minutes worth of calls. Multiplied by 10, you see it's over 28,000 minutes. Plus, multiplied by 0.50 cents or so, 50 cents, it's over 14,000 euros 1 weekend. So how can they be speaking for 48 hours in a row? It's not logical, right? But this is an account, so I can plug in a phone or a different call centers. So I have an account and I can have 10 people speaking at the same time. So I get a call office and I have 10 devices and keep calling and calling. So it is possible. And what if instead of Senegal they call premium numbers? Here in Spain, 806, which is 2 euros per minute. So do the maths. As we were saying before, one of the greatest problems here is not requesting an authentication when placing a call, especially if you're opening the firewall. If our call center is connected to the internet, the operator naturally will be sending data and we will send them to the operator, but anyone from outside will send us packets, sending a packet with an invite trying to place a call, and they will be calling outside the call center. as a demo, I developed this script trying to place calls through misconfigured call centers. And if we run it, that's what it does. We say, this is the address for the call center and the number we want to call. The script will send the invite packet to the server. Server will return as a trying. It is trying if it's misconfigured. Then ringing, as long as the phone is ringing. And finally, 200. So go ahead, okay. When they take the phone, pick it up. And we can also force the ID so that they see the ID on their phone as long as the call center forces it. And if you have not fallen asleep yet, you might wonder why. What's this worth? What's this for? Because if I place a call through a script, the other person picks up, I'll speak, right? But since these are messages, packets, there is a specific message that is the refer thing through which you can transfer calls. We have a call to a given phone number, but when they pick up, they transfer the call elsewhere to a different number. So we have two people in communication, and there would be a twofold expense at the call center because they will be placing two of it. So with the script, we will send the address, the phone number, and the transfer number. When they pick up, we will send the refer packet to have it transferred to the next phone number. Let's see a demo. Let's hope it doesn't fail. This is a script we've seen before. And so what we'll do is, these are the numbers. These are on script because I'll be calling me and my wife is around, and I don't think you should see the phone number. And so we will say, this is the ID number. Let me show you the ID.
Okay, so these are all mine, the incoming. Can you hear it? Okay, this is just an example of what can be done by using a purely configured switchboard. As soon as two voice over IP operators, we're going to have many different things here. So we're going to have PBXs and providers, and they're connected from all over the place, so we're gonna just block the firewall. And internally, voice over IP operator is not a switchboard, it's going to have many things, radio server. So here we face different problems. First of all, to securitize all the internal services we have. For instance, a database it cannot be public, it's for internal use. Then we have customers with different needs. Here we cannot establish a call policy because customers will have to call during daytime, in the evening, some will have to call abroad, etc. So it's harder. We have a twofold responsibility. First, to prevent and protect ourselves as operators of possible attacks, and then protect our customers as much as possible. We cannot act instead of them. We can give them tools, but we are not sure if they're going to use them, and if they're in trouble, they're in trouble too often. So we have to establish consumption limits. So if they have an average of 100 a month, I'm going to give them 120 limit, so that's prevention. There are other services, like I've said earlier on. This would be a callback service. Callback services, I tell the system to call me so that I don't spend money. The system calls me and I dial the destination number and I speak and I get through. So I have the destination is called, it's ranked with the company ID so that I don't spend money. But this is a poor configuration because you are trusting the call identifier. But we have seen how we can change that call identifier. And here we're not going to be able to talk to anybody because if we pretend to be somebody else, they would call them. So we're just going to be a pain in their neck. But if this is not a callback system, but somebody who has a special service to call their countries, I call with their phone call identifier, and that's going to go on their bill. So if you call through one of these bridges, you should at least be asked for a PIN. Do you know, changing the matter, do you know what a honeypot is? You can use it to misbehave, but not necessarily. To study types of attacks, to know the IPs of the attackers. I set up a honeypot for 5 months. I've been running it, and I haven't published the service anywhere. All the packets that I've received, over 2 million packets in 5 months, and with scanners always. And I set it up in June, in July and August. It seems like criminals also go on holidays, and in September it went back up. If we analyze the results, we can see this is taken into account a single IP per packet, and most access that I've had are messages of the type options, and that means it's a scanner. When somebody sends an option packet, it's like in the web to see how you answer. It's just to detect if there's a server behind. Then there are many messages of the type invader, people trying to call directly from the system. This is a proxy in this case. We also have a lot of register messages, trying to register accounts obviously to crack them. And if we take into account all the IP addresses, we can see that the number goes up. Brute force attacks to good. We also have a very high number of invites, people with scripts trying to call through the switchboard. As to user agents, I don't know if you can see properly. The user agent comes from the message itself, and it identifies the type of device that's calling. For instance, on a phone, we can see if it's a big stream or an the applications. Well, usually when you program an application, you have a user agent, but the 3D scanner, which is, this is a Python script, and if I want to use this tool to find servers and do illegal stuff, the first thing I do is to change the user DB, because everybody's going to do that. And the honeypot allows for everything, but any normal system will block this user. So we find Field Scanner, and many user Field Scanner is it's part of the Servicios tool in Python to locate IP servers to try to crack accounts. EasyCli is an application of Kaplan Soft for Windows, and it's a small framework that allows us to generate a number of messages so that they come out automatically. And they're basically used to try to phone for free, similar to the script page that I've shown you earlier on. As to IP addresses, well, you don't see at the top, but it says over 50,000. And that's peculiar because I've done the honeypot. It's a homemade honeypot that I've done in a couple of hours, and when you try to register a user with one password, I say is correct. So, but if you give me another password, I also say it's correct. So I think it's incredible how many people send these messages. As to the time, you can see there are requests at all day long. If you look, distributed them for a country with a single IP, you get more people from the United States, followed by Germany, Palestine, Great Britain. As to with all IPs, the more persistent are still the ones in the States, then French people, Germans, English. We can see this in a map, more visual. Green dots, a few axes, yellow. It's a bit more, and red is really, they'd overdo it. This is the United States map of all the attacks that I've received. From Europe, France, Germany, England. Here, all the dots are very close because when we try to geolocalize the IP, because when you try to geolocate, they always give you the same area, and I try to distribute them a bit more so we could read the map. It's peculiar that in Malaysia all the attacks come from the south, because it seems like at the north they have no internet. I don't know if you may not have noted here that there are so many messages of the invite type, because it didn't used to happen before. People used to get register messages. People were trying to sort of break into your account to be able to call. But here we can see that there are lots of people who try to make the phone call directly. And why is that? First of all, because if we want to get an account in a system, first of all, we have to do brute force, remote brute force, and that's going to leave a lot of trace, and there are many systems that will block that. And if we crack the account, there will probably be two channels to do concurrent calls. But with invite messages, if we manage to make the phone call, if it's a poor, the switchboard has a poor configuration, then we could make the phone call directly. There'll be no tracing, and the output will be through the operator trunk. So we can make a lot more phone calls. And this takes us to the business of the premium numbers. We've seen some real cases. Well, you don't need to be so smart to realize that if we're stealing user accounts from providers or whatever, and we decide to set up a platform to sell traffic and take the phone calls through those operators, if we make 10, 12 phone calls, but it doesn't happen anything. But if we make many more, then we will be found out. But many people, and many mafias, what they do is that they buy premium numbers. Imagine we hire a lot of premium numbers, and we make money when we are cold. But since we're going to use sort of compromise accounts to call to our own number, we're saving on stuff, because each one of those numbers, when they answer, the quote is red and loud, and people will be waiting for hours, and we need no advertising because we will make our own phone calls. Speaking of premium numbers, who here calls to tarot numbers or erotic lines, adult lines? Do you know how the systems work? That often goes through V over IP. Do you know any famous fortune teller? Fortune tellers are famous because they spend a lot of money in advertising. They invest a lot of money, and they have to recover that money. And how do they do it? Well, obviously, if they have a phone number and just listening, I really cannot see Rappel 24 hours a day waiting or answering these phone calls. And they select people who are very good, that have studied with Harry Potter at the same university, and they are the ones who would take our phone calls. But that's not the case. In La Castellana, I haven't seen any business building full of pure fortune tellers. They subcontract these phone calls with phone call centers. So if I've done that, I hired 50 premium numbers through which, when people call me, I will receive money. And out of those 50, I'm going to outsource 10 companies, and I'm going to give them 5 numbers to each of them to keep on receiving phone calls. And if they do it well, they will keep the business, and otherwise I'll give it to somebody else, and I'll give them a percentage for the time that they keep people in the line, so we can all make money. But if you put yourself in the shoes of the call center, you have this fortune teller who comes in, but I can't hire that many people because I don't know for how long they're gonna give me this business. So what do? It is the same thing. If I receive phone calls and I get money for that, a percentage, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to look for people who would just answer these phone calls. They only need to have internet, a good voice, and be able to keep people from... So what's the profile for that? Women, of course. Housewives who are unemployed, people from countries from South America where during our nighttime they are awake, and we're going to give these people a commission. So we do not know if the person in charge is really qualified. This is a business. These are people who are receiving these phone calls, but also other type of phone calls. It's about future, telling the future, or it's about sex, or it's about... and I don't... Not everybody works that way, but many of them do. They answer on the topic, but because depending on who's calling. But if we look at the load of our system, we're going to have IP addresses of countries that we didn't know existed. And so what do we do if we receive that phone call? Can we trust the phone call identifier? We've seen we cannot, because it can be altered and it can actually be in any geographic location. I connect through internet, I can be in China and I can call with a Russian number. In a conventional system, we're going to suppose that a Movistar user calls a Vodafone user, and we have localized both users. But in a voice over IP system, although the outgoing carrier is still Movistar, this phone call comes from an operator and maybe another one until we get to the emitter. How can we locate him? A few months ago, somebody from the security forces from Alicante called the Guardia Civil, phoned to my office, and they were doing research on a phone that had been stolen, and they were calling all the numbers that phone had called to, and they've spoken, one person in our company have spoken over this phone for a minute, but I looked into it and there was no phone call to that phone, and there are two possibilities. Either they had altered the phone call identifier, and I think that's very unlikely, or maybe the carrier has allocated this number to me afterwards. Right now, I need 20 numbers in Madrid, and I call a carrier and they give it to them. So we're working with virtual number, and that's very difficult to explain to the police in a small village. How do I explain that you can alter a phone call identifier of virtual numbers? So how can we locate the emitter of a phone call? We have to work backwards. We should not trust the number, but we should go to the carrier or the receptor and see who has emitted that phone call. Was it Movistar in this case? Okay, so we'll ask Movistar. Who inputted this phone call at this time and calling this number? Was it your number, your own customer, or an operator? An operator, and we work backwards until we get to the IP address of the emitter. We're not looking for the owner of a number or for the phone number, we're looking for an IP address. And nevertheless, there are still phone call systems that cannot be traceable, so we're not completely sure we can find the emitter of this phone call. So as conclusions, voice over IP has many advantages, and in fact I've mentioned earlier on that there are many operators that are opting for IP even if we don't know it, and they're shrinking away from Telefonica. Conventional telephony is disappearing. Everything is going to go through voice over IP. We have to use it, but you have to have common sense as well. We have to be aware of the dangers and to try to prevent them. And the difference with other type of services is that here we can lose money, so you have to be a lot more careful, that's all. Okay, thanks very much. I don't know if I've finished too soon. Do you have questions? Thanks, congratulations for the talk. And the service that you just explained, the untraceable service, what does it use? Does it use several? I think this is a service through TOR. These are data packets. They go through internet. Within VoIP, we can have communications through TLS or TCP. So you can make phone calls through by using TCP or through the TOR network. I don't go in detail on how this works, but I guess it is through TOR. What you have said earlier on in the demo, when you've executed the script, you have done a communication with the switchboard VoIP, and the phone call was between your telephone and somebody else's. For that communication to happen, the service provider, Movistar, Vodafone, must have the capacity to have voice over IP, but some operators don't have that. No, the phone call is made to a switchboard. It can be in an office. I set up a server in an office, and then that server, as I've mentioned earlier on, to go to the conventional network, has a data channel with an IP operator that will invoice the phone calls. And from that upwards, that operator will get in touch with the carrier. So to that central switchboard, people in the office, phone calls will go out fine, but if you open the firewall, it will go through the room of the operator. Do you follow me? You have a switchboard between extensions. They can talk with each other and want to make an outgoing call. You have a connection with your operator, and they take that outside and they connect you with a mobile phone or whatever. Any telephone that's within that switchboard can make phone calls. If you have that switchboard open to internet, I can pretend to be a phone within your company. I send you a packet that can include an extension, and you go out through the operator. But the difference is, if I send this request, is instead of making it through a phone, because I have no account to register myself, I just send you the invite with the script in case I have to make a transfer, a call transfer. Otherwise, I cannot talk. And is there a fee? Would you charge for the operator? It's just a phone call coming out of the switchboard. So if I make a phone call to a mobile phone, I will be charged for that. Or if I call to an 806, whatever the fees are for the operator. It's like I go to your phone and I go to your home and I connect to your phone and phone from there. You're going to be charged for that. Hello? When it comes to the identifier change, you've used the phone number, but could you have a name? Telegram's calling, or no? This follows rules, and you only can have numbers. You would have the if I called you, you would only see the name if that phone is in your list of contacts. And in fact, I can call because the operator's on top of me. If I have hired a lot of geographic numbers, allows me to have any identifier, but always within certain rules. For instance, right now, there's a new law. You cannot have an identifier which is 902. So 806, you cannot call with those identifiers. So this number, it's a 9-digit number, and it works. And in fact, I've I've tried with these numbers, 5 digits, and they still work. When you're tracing the phone calls, if you change the identifier, is that possible? Yes. Well, you do not trust the identifier. I have made a phone call, and the carrier has made the phone call through the conventional network. It knows who's coming because it's coming to the IP address. If you go to the operator, you say this person this is a fraudulent web page. They can trace back until they go to the IP address of the telephone that got in touch with the switchboard that has sent the phone call. Is that all? Okay, thanks very much.